I mean, Quinn is the future. I mean, I believe with him here, the city's going to win a championship, and it's just about bringing in the right pieces for him.
Welcome in, Hawks fans. It's your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another episode. We have a special guest with us again. He's been on the show once before, Brad Rowland. Welcome back. How are you, sir?
I'm living the dream. I appreciate you having me. Always fun to talk some Hawks basketball for sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the Hawks have been, I think, a major topic of discussion, I think, during this past year. It probably will be going into this offseason. But let's talk about the season that just ended a couple weeks ago. Brad, would it be safe to say that this past season for the Hawks was probably one of the most active off the court in terms of in the media? You know, all the stories about Trey, all the stories about John, the stories about Nate, and then the front office and just everything and the whirlwind that was the Hawks this season. And just, it's probably been more just out there than any other Hawks season. Am I right? Am I right here?
It could be, yeah. I mean, it was really busy, man. I people almost forget that Travis Schlenk left. Like that's a big deal when your head of basketball leaves in December or whatever that was. Like that almost gets forgotten about because of everything you talked about. You know, the Trey stuff has been out there, Nate getting fired, them hiring an established head coach in February to a huge deal. That just never happens in the modern NBA for a team was still trying to win. Like occasionally you'll see that, like for a team that's like, all right, this year doesn't really matter. Let's just evaluate. They were trying to win. They made the playoffs. So no, it was very, very busy before you even get into like the trade stuff that's kind of on every team, but they always have trade candidates on this roster. They made some trades. They added Sadiq Bey. They kind of changed the roster a little bit to the better in February. But yeah, anytime you get a coach firing, a major coach hiring, a president of basketball operations out the door, the wrestler, the Tony wrestler, Nick wrestler reporting, like all of that stuff that happened in the last 4, 5, 6 months, it was a lot over a short period of time.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, some of the stories I know people had an issue with. Some people thought about unnecessary attention to the team or felt like something that was just maybe trying to push maybe a media narrative, of some people say, and everything. But just last thing to touch on last season is just now on the court focusing. How would you assess this last season for the team? Would you view it as a failure? Would you view it as it's been a whirlwind, so it's kind of like they did the best they could? How would you view what just happened with the Hawks this past season on the court?
I think it's kind of a nuanced answer. Big picture, if you go back to September, October, I don't think anybody would have been happy with 41-41 and a first round exit, if that makes sense. I think they would probably acknowledge that. Ownership, front office, all the turmoil that happened, Travis leaving, the coach firing, and not that anybody was like overjoyed with Nate necessarily, but like I don't think that if things had gone the way that they were supposed to go, quote unquote, that Nate would have got fired in February. It would have been maybe at the end of the season or something like that. But because they were underachieving in the minds of everyone, they moved on. But then you look forward to, like, if you ask me again in March, will this team take Boston to 6 games in the first round and be pretty competitive in that series? That would have felt like a pretty decent or pretty good outcome for where they were at that point in time. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. I do think, like, taking a step back, they did play well in the playoffs. I'm sure we can talk about it if you want to. But as far as like 6 months of evaluation, 7 months evaluation of the full season, it was not what they wanted. I mean, the word failure, like, I don't think it was a total disaster. In the like things, there were plenty of things to be positive about. They did make the playoffs. If they hadn't made the playoffs, like there was a moment, I'm sure you remember this, back in like March, where it's like, are they even gonna make the play-in? Like there's a chance they might not make it, and that would have been a failure, I think, pretty clearly. Especially with, not that they had no injuries, but they weren't like super duper banged up all year either. Like I think if you asked me if they would be 41-41, I would have said, like, what injuries did they have? And they really didn't have anything crazy. So I know I'm rambling, but I do think that it's not what they wanted. It was a below average season for what I would have thought they would have had, but there was enough at the end. Plus you add in Quin Snyder, I think you can kind of get to the point where it's not quite a disaster.
Yeah, definitely. I think that just, like you said, we didn't have any major injuries, and it felt like the teams played varied each game. Sometimes you saw a really good Hawks team or the team that you thought you would see. And then you saw games where it's just like, what happened? Obviously, few games, Houston's Rocket game stands out. Charlotte Hornets twice stands out. Those are games where you're just like, what happened? And then you see what happened in the playoff series against Boston, the way they play, especially in those last 4 games. You're just like, that's 2 variations, 2 different teams. Obviously, 2 different head coaches also in a couple of those situations as well. But now going into the coaching, position, they hired Quin Snyder during the season. different move. You don't usually hire coaches in season and coach in season, but this was viewed as a way to evaluate and also to maybe try to see what works with what he may want to do in the future and who may not work. So now going full scale into the offseason, we know he's formulating his coaching staff. He's already hired Mike Brey, former Notre Dame head coach. What are your thoughts of Snyder through these the last quarter of the season, and what do you think his plan is going into this offseason with this current roster and just with the team in general?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Number one, he was the guy, when they moved on from Nate, I kind of said, look, if you can get Quin Snyder, go get him. And you never know. I mean, even people that cover the team closely, and I have some sources and stuff, like, you never know about coach hiring in particular. It's an interesting process, especially in February, like when not everybody's hiring coaches and it's not even available. Is he going to take calls? Like how's the whole thing going to happen? But they got it done pretty quickly. It was odd in the way that it all happened, him coming in, but there were advantages to that. Like you name one of them, the fact that he got to come in and evaluate guys for 2 months in a live environment when they're trying to win, that is really valuable. I think they've all kind of acknowledged that, to have him be in the weeds every day, even with assistants that weren't his guys. Like he was complimentary of the assistant coaches too. He was really high on guys that he inherited, and he's going to move on obviously from those guys that it's been reported. But just getting that practical experience is really important. And also, by the way, if you wanted Quin Snyder, getting the head start on him, hiring him in February and not having to deal with the Bucks or whoever's going to fire their coach and not having to battle for his services is not a small thing. Like if you're the Hawks, like that, you go ahead and get it done now. You're paying for it, but I think that's big. As far as the offseason is concerned, he's not the GM. I think he's going to have a lot of influence. That's kind of the only thing that everyone agrees on with Quin is like he has some level of influence in the front office in a way that Nate did not, for instance. But he's not the guy in charge. It doesn't seem at this point. That's kind of one of the things that we may never know how much juice he has out here in front of the scenes, but behind the scenes, I'm sure he'll have some influence. But as far as like getting these guys together, I think him and Trey and DeJounte, they all talked about it on the way out and exit interviews and stuff. Like they're going to be talking all summer long and planning all summer long. And I think it's not just this, but because it's the biggest topic, because these guys are star players. I think Quin having a full offseason to kind of implement his ideas on the roster, in particular on offense, getting Trey and DeJounte maximized together is a big thing. Also kind of putting in what he wants, because I was banging the drum on this when they hired him. It's really hard to put in your stuff without training camp and without practice, and teams don't really practice. And they have practices during the season, but if you don't know this, like it's mostly game plan stuff. Like you're not running your full like contact practices and installs, especially in February, March, and April. These guys are tired. It's a long season. So to have a full training camp is huge. To be able to kind of just tinker with your stuff that you want to put in, have your own staff, and have a dedicated time to implement it is going to be big. I mean, that's very kind of vague, but I think that he'll put in, it'll look a lot more like he wants it to look. I think it was kind of the hybrid version of Quin with Nate's staff and Nate's system in some respects. It'll be more, I guess it'll be 100% or close to it, Quin by the time we get to October, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited about that too. I think we already know from what his coaching style is. First, he obviously wants to put up a lot of threes. That's just part of what he wants to do. And so I know guys are going to be working on that three-point shot this offseason. And then there's going to be more motion probably in the office, I'm expecting, especially watching some of the old Utah Jazz films. They had a lot of motion. They were really good in transition, which I've always felt like the team should be better in transition with Trey and now DeJounte as well. But let's go into the roster now. Let's just talk about the young guys first. Let's talk about Onyeka Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, AJ Griffin. Got a lot of Hawks fans are viewing these guys as core pieces, like future of the team, everything. And Jalen seemed to, get more run under Snyder. Okongwu, people are hoping we'll see what happens with Clint Capella. Maybe he gets a chance to be a starter this year. And I think one of the biggest questions I think some people are worrying about is AJ, because he was in and out of the lineup under Snyder. So what is your initial impression on maybe what their future trajectory is with this team next season?
Yeah, I think it's number one, these guys are all talented. They like them all. They're all, I think, future key pieces. They are core pieces. Like how you want to evaluate core pieces is kind of in the eye of the beholder. Like you have your inner core, like might just be Trey by himself. You know what I mean? Like the guys who are kind of untouchable. It's kind of just Trey's kind of there, and then but they're in that next tier too. Like these guys are all really important to the way that they're going to build their team. And without being dire about it, like they kind of need them to be really good in the future. They don't have a lot of flexibility anymore. They spend a lot of money and things like that. So these are young guys. They're cost controlled, etc. I think Okongwu, is already a starting level player, and it's not anybody's fault. Like, Clint is still really good, and no matter what you think about Capella, I think the people that are lower or higher or whatever, Capella's still a good starter in the NBA, I think, objectively. And that's not, it's just the luck of the draw. They have these two guys, and it's kind of a good problem is the way I put it. Like, they have 48 minutes of good center play. But Okongwu, I think, would be, for a lot of teams, already starting caliber. It would not surprise me if he starts opening night because they move on from Clint. I think if Clint's here, it probably will be Clint starting because that's just the way things go. But I think if they move on from Clint, no one should be surprised by that. And I believe Onyeka is already ready to start for whatever team he's on, probably be the Hawks. And he has limitations in some respects, but I think he's got real upside too. His defense is fantastic already, all those things. So I think you could be pretty safe about him. There is a contract negotiation this summer. They can extend him. They're allowed to. I'm not sure if they're going to, but that's an interesting topic of conversation too. AJ and Jalen are more uncertain. They've just done less. They've proven less. Jalen played a lot, like you said, under Snyder. His game is really interesting. Like, he's a former top 5 guy in his high school class. Like, he's really talented, but he's not like a plug and play guy. He has interesting strengths and weaknesses. His shooting is a question, but his transition game is fantastic. You see him on the right night. He just looks like an absolute star going end to end. And I think that they like him a lot. And we saw that Quin was trying to build him up. They want to get him to shoot. He was kind of being ignored by Boston. That's a little bit of a question about him long term, but his passing, his defense, I think he'll keep improving. And then I wouldn't worry about AJ. I mean, I think it was really just a numbers game of why he wasn't playing. Snyder has kind of talked about not wanting to play 10 or 11 guys all the time. And they were healthy. I mean, it's a good problem, but they went into the playoffs. Like, most teams have some health concerns in the playoffs. The Hawks had none. And AJ was the 10th guy. And that's not a bad thing for a rookie. I think the addition of Sadiq Bey was a good thing, but that kind of pushed AJ down a level, and they ended up liking what Jalen was going to give them more than AJ. But I think long term they love AJ. I know that Travis was the guy that drafted both those guys. He's not there anymore, but Landry was there when they drafted AJ. Everybody likes him, and I think his upside is really high too. I mean, to get both those guys, Jalen and AJ, in the middle of the first round, it's really great. You don't want to get out ahead of yourself. I try to at least smallly kind of dampen expectations just a little bit, because Hawks fans, you see the right flash on the right night, and Jalen Johnson starts getting compared to LeBron. I'm sure you've seen that. It's like, guys, we got to relax a little bit about these guys, but that's only just because if you play the numbers, not everybody's going to work out. It is what it is. But if you look at the higher end, not even like the ceiling outcomes for those guys, if you look at the higher end outcomes, they're definitely good starters or better long term. And whether that's your starting point guard of the future, I don't know. Like, I think if you play the math, it's not super duper likely that your 2026 front court is exactly AJ, Jalen, and Onyeka. Just between trades and guys not. I mean, it's possible that's the case for sure, but there's a lot to be excited about. I think that at the very least, you saw what you needed to see from all three of those guys.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like I said, we saw flashes from all of them. And I think the biggest thing I think people just want, that they felt like they did not get under Nate, and Nate has said, is that he just wasn't developing. And it was prominent in what the playing time was for the guys. And now I think under Snyder, he loves teaching, he loves coaching, he loves development. I think they're going to have a chance under him to get that. And then we'll see, especially, I like you mentioned, Onyeka's in a contract year in terms of negotiation, could negotiate. Jalen, his year's coming up. I'm sure he wants to show them, okay, you can extend me, and then eventually AJ. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But now let's go to the backcourt with Trae Young, DeJounte Murray. Young has undergone a lot of media scrutiny. People feel like the media does not like Trae at all. He was paired up with Snyder. It feels like that relationship's going to work. So far, they seem like they respect each other. There's good chemistry. Trae has bought into him. I think DeJounte as well has done the same. And like you said, they're trying to make that backcourt now work and going into this next season. So what do you think of the pairing of those guys with Snyder? What do you think maybe the vision is for Snyder there with those two? And as the guards next year, as they continue to move forward, especially since he's going to implement his entire offense, get his coaching in, and et cetera.
Yeah, the way that I've put it before is that I don't think Trae and DeJounte are a perfect fit, nor would they ever be a perfect fit. There are the questions that you might imagine. They're pretty small, for instance. DeJounte is better with the ball in his hands. All those things. But I don't think it was a disaster in year one by any means. I think if you talk to the right person, or the wrong person, I guess in this case, you might be like, well, they made this huge mistake. I don't think so. They paid a real price for DeJounte. It didn't go perfectly, but there was good signs. There were good signs along the way. And I do think that without picking on Nate too much, he would not have been the coach that I would have wanted to implement these two guys. And I think they kind of knew that behind the scenes, and whatever you want to say that. Like, I think just Nate's strengths and weaknesses are not what you would need to sort of tailor to Trae and DeJounte. I think Quin will, again, going back to what we said before, have these 3-4 months to kind of tailor his offense to this guy, which is very helpful. He also coached a not necessarily similar, but kind of similar pairing with Mitchell and Mike Conley in Utah when those guys played together. Two smaller guards who were point guards, but Mike was playing more off the ball, all that stuff. Not exactly the same, but kind of similar. And I think that the big thing is what you said before as well. Trae has been effusive in his praise of Quin Snyder, and that, if you cover him as I've covered Trae since he got here, it's noticeable that Trae is bought in with Quin. And Trae's not a guy who just says things to say them. Like, sometimes you want Trae to almost say the political thing more often. He doesn't usually want to say this stuff, but he was really, really, really positive about Quin. Quin was also about Trae. That's number one. That's the biggest thing, because DeJounte's a really good player. Trae's still the franchise guy. Trae is the best player. It's not close. So having that relationship be really important. I don't think that DeJounte is exactly the guy that Quin would want, if that makes sense, like strengths and weaknesses perspective. And that doesn't mean DeJounte's not good. I think they all know that he's a really good player, but he's not someone that is a like perfect fit with Trae on offense. But if you saw, especially in the playoffs and down the stretch, they got DeJounte taking more threes. That's one thing that's easy to see. But DeJounte is not a guy who likes to hoist threes a lot. He's more mid-range guy, and Quin doesn't always love that. But they've let him do a little bit of it. They're not going to tell him that he can't do it anymore. But getting that bridge together, and the hope would also be that they can kind of figure it out defensively, because the little thing always is like, can these guys defend enough? And that they were hoping Murray was going to change the defense. That didn't really happen. Trae, to his credit, has improved. I don't think you notice that unless you watch the Hawks all the time. Trae is better than he used to be. No question about it. But that is a real question. Is like, can these two guys work on offense for sure? But also, can you build a defense that's good enough with these two guys as your starting backcourt? And that is an open question that Quin's going to have to figure out too.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, when you have 2 point guards starting the backcourt, of course, your defense will, in some situations, depending on the type of players you have, could potentially suffer a little bit there. So he will have to figure out how can he make that all work together and everything. So one more question before I let you go, Brad. Let's go into some guys whose futures are maybe uncertain. John Collins has been brought up in trade rumors for years.
Yep.
People feel like after this past season, his decline in numbers, Jalen Johnson, Bay, they feel like it seems like this is this offseason that they will move off of him. But obviously, we've thought that before. So we don't know if that actually is going to happen. And then going back to Bay, I feel like played really well since they got him when they got him at the trade deadline. It feels like he is a Quin Snyder player, if that's fair to say. And he obviously is open to get a contract negotiations this offseason as well. So what is your thoughts on those two guys and their future with this team?
It's really, really interesting. I mean, I am prone to always saying that trades are harder than people think that they are, especially fans. Like you think you can just press a button and trade a guy. It's not as easy as that, which is one of the reasons why John is still here. I think that if you listen, and especially off the record stuff, but even the way that he's talked about on the record by coaches, everybody likes John. Everybody's always liked John. Quin likes John. You can already tell. The front office likes John, but it's not a perfect fit anymore. It's just not. And it never was. Like, as soon as they brought in Clint, and I'll be the first to say, the numbers are always good when John and Clint play together, and people hate it. It's not always the most aesthetically pleasing thing in the world, but they defend better with the two of them playing, which leads to them playing better in the whole. But the best role for John Collins has always been as a role man on offense. And he's fantastic at that. And he doesn't do it anymore because they can't do it with him, because you have Clint and Onyeka playing next to him. So that's my long preamble to say, I think everyone knows that John is probably better off somewhere else. That's John's side. That's the team side. That's everybody kind of understands the deal here. And I think because of that, and like you said, the emergence of Jalen, Bay, it might be the most likely that it's ever been that John is traded. But it's not 100%. People are now assuming that he is definitely gone, and I would not do that. I would stress that I would not assume that. They've gotten close before. There's been a couple times, either at deadlines or drafts or whatever in the process, where I thought he was probably going to get traded. It never happened. I've never been to the definitely place. I'm still not there now. If I had to guess, I think John's probably traded between now and start of the season, but that's not definitely. So we'll see on that. And I think, by the way, if you wanted to, this is me talking now, not reporting. I think the way that you would bring John back, if you couldn't find a deal that you like for John, if you move Clint, it's easier to bring Collins back, in my mind, because you're a little bit more nimble, you're a little bit more flexible. You can maybe play Collins as a backup 5 a little bit, have him and Onyeka play together. That's the pathway, I believe, for them to keep John. I'll be pretty surprised if they keep Collins and Capella. That will surprise me, but we'll see. As for Bey, he is kind of a Quin Snyder player, to your point. Like he's a small ball 4, I think, mostly, but he can play a little bit of 3. The shooting is really valuable, and he will get it up. That's the thing that you got to love about Bey. He is not afraid. He will launch, and they like that about him. The question with him is defense. It was pretty rough at times defensively. So, and again, not going back to it too often, but having him on the court with Trey and DeJounte, or with Trey and Bogey, and it gets to be a little bit flammable defensively. But they do like him. They paid a real price for him. And I'll be surprised if he gets extended, because it's a year ahead of time, and you don't often see your 7th man type get extended like this. Like, he was reportedly asking for a bunch of money in Detroit. How real that is, I don't know. But I'm sure they'll make the calls and see if they can find a number. It won't blow you away. I think, Okongwu is probably the bigger priority if you're trying to lock somebody down this summer. If you're the Hawks, between him and Bey, he's just a little bit more high upside, younger guy, more established in the room in Atlanta. But Bey helps them a lot for sure. He gave them a different element that they definitely needed. So, if they move on from John, I'll be interested to see if they do that. Let's just for 1 second say, I just assume that they're going to trade Collins, which again I wouldn't assume. But if you did, are they going to roll with Jalen and Bey as their 4s, or do you bring somebody else in, either for the trade or whatever? Like, do you go another option, or are they really comfortable with your whole plan at the 4 being Jalen and Bey? I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be interested to see what they actually do. But they like both guys. But John, I think it's one of those things. Again, I don't want to make it too broad, but I think everyone knows, and John's not going to demand a trade. He's not that kind of guy, but he knows that he's better off somewhere else at this point. His role is just so small in Atlanta compared to what it would be other places. And I think that might tip the scales a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And John has done a lot for this team over these last few years, especially since they've been competitive and being in playoff runs. He's always been looked at as kind of the leader of the team a little bit, always hyping guys up, always motivating guys, especially when the Hawks have slowly, I've said, that Eastern Conference Finals run, they had a Solo, they had Lou, they had Gallo, and then every year they've slowly kind of taken one away, and they're replacing them with other young guys, and now people are like, where's the leader on this team? And John's always kind of been that consistent person in people's ears, so if that does happen, I think, they'll just have to be able to find someone who can replace that, just that valuable leadership, that connection with players off the court. And then obviously with Bey, we'll see, like you said, Okongwu probably is more of a priority, but we'll see if maybe, like I said, a call happens, maybe they can talk a number. You never know. I mean, they've surprisingly extended Clint, I think some people felt like, and surprisingly extended Bogey. So they clearly make these calls, and maybe if they can find a number, they can make something happen. But
yep,
I appreciate you coming on, Brad. Let everybody know where they can find you and listen to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on short notice and behind the scenes. I thank you for being accommodating of me. You can find me mostly at the Locked On Hawks podcast. I host that show 5 times-ish per week, at least during the season. Also, follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. I also do some writing work, patreon.com/BT Rowland on the Hawks. And then I am a writer for Diamond Up Rocks, covering the NBA, NBA draft, college basketball, also some stuff on Sportsline. I'm everywhere, but the best place you can find me, Locked On Hawks and at BT Rowland on Twitter.
Yes, sir. Like I said, appreciate you for coming on. And guys, we'll have to see what happens this offseason as we start to get closer to the draft and free agency for the NBA, and see what our Hawks do come there for the next season. But it's your boy Bryce Lewis. That's Brad Rowland. We'll see you next time.